I arrived 20 minutes early to my own birthday dinner. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to pick up the wine I'd ordered from the LCBO, a 2019 Malbec from Argentina that my son had specifically requested, and be there by 6. But the parkway was clear for once. No construction, no slowdowns, nothing to justify being late, and I found myself pulling into his driveway at 20 to 6 while the sun was still hanging low over the cedars on the property line. I could see the lights on inside, the kitchen, the living room. I could hear music, something low and jazzy that my son's wife always put on when she was trying to make a place feel like it was hers. I sat in the car for a moment, 63 years old, and I still didn't know how to just walk into a room. My son had moved into this house 2 years ago. It was a nice house. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, double garage, one of those newer neighborhoods out past Canada, where every street was named after a tree that no longer existed. Oak Meadow Drive, Birchwood Crescent, Ash Glen Court. The trees themselves had been cleared to make room for the subdivisions. I'd always found that a little on the nose. I grabbed the wine from the back seat, straightened my jacket, and walked up the front path. I could hear voices inside now. My son, his wife, Daphne, someone else, maybe her brother, who I'd met once at the wedding and couldn't quite place after that. I raised my hand to ring the bell, and that's when I heard it. Through the door, clear as anything, my son's voice, lifted in the way it gets when he's performing for a crowd, that particular brightness he puts on when he wants people to think he's the most charming man in the room. To a quiet evening, he was saying, without the old man looking over our shoulders for once. Laughter. More than one person. I stood there with my hand still raised. Honestly, he went on, and I could hear the clink of glasses, I don't know why we even invite him. He just sits there judging everything. More laughter. Daphne's voice, lower, something I couldn't make out. Then my son again. No, I mean it. The whole night's going to be better without him. We should do this every year. I lowered my hand. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. The cold November air coming off the Ottawa River had a particular quality to it, clean and sharp, the kind that reminds you that winter isn't a metaphor up here, it's just a fact. I breathed it in. I thought about the wine in my hand, a bottle I'd driven 20 minutes out of my way to pick up because my son had specifically asked for it. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, put the wine on the passenger seat, and drove home. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't heartbroken. I was 63 years old and I had been in the workforce for 38 years, the last 22 of them as a chartered professional accountant with my own practice in Nepean. I had reviewed the books of companies whose owners thought they were too clever to be caught. I had sat across tables from people who looked me in the eye and lied without blinking. I was not easily shaken. But my son was 41 years old, and he was making toasts about how much better his life was when I wasn't in it, and that was something I needed to sit with for a while. I got home. I made myself a cup of tea. Proper tea. None of the herbal nonsense my daughter kept sending me, and I sat at the kitchen table and I thought about what I'd heard. My son, Gareth, had married Daphne 4 years ago. She was 36 now, worked in marketing for a tech company in Gatineau. Had strong opinions about open-concept floor plans and very little patience for people who disagreed with her. I had tried, genuinely, to build a relationship with her. I'd invited them both to the cottage in Muskoka 2 summers running. I'd helped them navigate the mortgage on the Canada house when their broker gave them bad advice. I'd lent Gareth money, not a small amount, when he'd left his job at the telecom company to start something he described as a consulting practice, and I described as several months of not working. The loan had never been repaid. We hadn't spoken about it. I drank my tea and I looked out the window at the street. A neighbor's cat was sitting on my front step, the gray one, doing that thing cats do where they act like they own whatever they're sitting on. My phone buzzed at 6:45, a text from Gareth. Hey, where are you? We're all waiting. I looked at it. I put the phone face down on the table and finished my tea. He called at 7. I didn't answer. At 7:15 he called again, and I picked up. Dad, we've been waiting. What happened? Something came up, I said. I'm sorry for the short notice. A pause. Are you okay? I'm fine. Have a good evening, Gareth. I hung up. Over the next week, I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I started keeping notes. Not about my feelings. I wasn't interested in journaling. I'd leave that for people with more tolerance for their own interior monologue. I kept notes about facts, dates, amounts, patterns. The kind of notes you keep when you're trying to understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of what someone wants you to see. What I'd observed about Gareth and Daphne's finances over the past 18 months had been bothering me in a low-level way that I hadn't quite let myself name. The house in Canada had been a stretch for them. I knew that because I'd reviewed their mortgage application at their request. Gareth's consulting income was inconsistent at best. Daphne's salary was solid but not extraordinary. The mortgage itself was manageable, but just barely. And yet, new furniture, twice in the last year. A trip to Costa Rica in February that Daphne had posted extensively on Instagram. A new vehicle for Gareth, a pickup truck, the fully loaded kind with the chrome package and the extended cab. I'd noticed these things in the way you notice small arithmetic errors in a column of numbers. Each one easy to explain away, all of them together suggesting something that wasn't adding up. I hadn't said anything. It wasn't my business. They were adults. But then, 10 days after my birthday, Daphne called me. She never called me. In 4 years of being my daughter-in-law, she had called me exactly twice. Once when Gareth was in the hospital with a kidney stone, and she needed someone to sit with her, and once when she wanted advice about whether to incorporate her side business. Both times she had been polite, businesslike, and utterly without warmth. This time her voice was different, soft, almost girlish. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," she said. "Not at all. I wanted to reach out myself because I think this is something that would really mean a lot coming from me." She laughed lightly. "Gareth doesn't always know how to talk to you about money things. I think he worries about seeming like he's asking for too much." I said nothing. "There's an opportunity," Daphne continued. "A real one. Gareth's been approached by a colleague, someone who's building a fintech platform, very early stage, but the projections are extraordinary. We've done our research and we really believe in it." I kept my voice completely neutral. "Tell me more." She told me more. The numbers she cited were impressive. 40% return in 18 months, equity stake that would vest over 3 years, regulatory approval supposedly already in process with FinTrack. She used phrases like ground floor opportunity and limited investor pool, and the kind of thing that doesn't come around twice. I knew every single one of those phrases. I had seen them in documentation I'd reviewed for clients who came to me after the fact, trying to understand where the money had gone. "What are you looking for from me?" I asked. "We were hoping you might consider investing," she said. Gareth didn't want to ask directly, but honestly, with your background, we thought you'd see the value immediately. We're thinking around 80,000, maybe 100 if you wanted a larger stake." I let a silence sit there for a moment. "I appreciate you calling," I said. "Let me think about it." "Of course," she said. "Take your time, but the window does close at the end of the month." After I hung up, I sat for a long time at my desk in the study. $80,000 to $100,000. My retirement savings. My RRSP, which I'd spent 3.5 decades building. The equity in this house, which my wife and I had bought 26 years ago, and which still carried her handwriting on the doorframe in the kitchen where she'd tracked the heights of our children. The ask was enormous. The opportunity was almost certainly fraudulent. And my son, who had stood in his kitchen 2 weeks ago and made a toast about how much better his life was without me in it, was apparently sending his wife to extract a significant portion of my retirement savings. I felt many things in that moment. I won't pretend I felt only clarity. But I was a CPA. I had spent decades understanding how money moved and where it disappeared to, and I knew that if I was going to protect myself, and possibly protect my son from whatever he'd gotten himself into, I needed information before I did anything else. I called a friend of mine, a man I'd worked alongside for years before he moved into forensic accounting. I described the opportunity without using any names. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Walk away from it. Everything you're describing is consistent with affinity fraud. The FinTrack angle is a classic add-on. Sounds credible, means nothing." I already knew that. But it helped to hear it from someone else. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something that didn't come naturally to me. I pretended nothing was wrong. I called Gareth. I told him I was sorry I'd missed the dinner, something vague about not feeling well. He accepted the explanation without pushing, which told me something. I agreed to Sunday lunch the following weekend, and I went, and I sat at their kitchen table and ate the pasta Daphne had made, and I watched the two of them, looking for what I might have missed. What I saw was this. Gareth was uncomfortable, not guilty, exactly, or not only guilty, but stretched thin in the way a person gets when they're managing too many versions of the truth at once. He laughed too quickly, changed subjects at odd moments. When I asked casually how the consulting work was going, he said really well, actually in a tone that meant the opposite. Daphne, on the other hand, was perfectly composed. She asked me about the opportunity in a way that seemed like a natural follow-up, almost offhand, as if it had been a minor topic instead of a request for $100,000. "Have you had a chance to look into it more?" she asked, refilling my water glass. "I have," I said. "I have some questions about the regulatory piece. Could you send me the prospectus?" "Of course," she said smoothly. "I'll have Gareth's colleague send it over." The prospectus arrived 3 days later, by email. I read it carefully. It was well put together, better than most, but the company incorporated in British Columbia. The investment structure was designed to obscure where funds actually went, and the named principals were either recently formed numbered companies or individuals I could find no verifiable professional history for. The FINTRAC registration number cited in the document resolved, when I checked, to a completely different entity. This was not an investment opportunity. This was a mechanism designed to take money from people who trusted the person presenting it to them. I thought about my son standing in his kitchen, making that toast. I thought about Daphne's smooth, practiced phone call. I thought about the truck, the furniture, the Costa Rica trip, the unrepaid loan. And then I thought about something else. Was Gareth doing this knowingly, or had he been pulled into it without fully understanding what it was? I didn't know the answer. That distinction mattered to me more than anything else. I called my daughter, Petra. She was 38, lived in Hamilton, worked in healthcare administration, and was about the most grounded person I knew. She and Gareth had always had a difficult relationship, too similar in some ways, too different in others, but she knew him. She knew how he moved through the world. "Has Gareth said anything to you recently?" I asked. "About investments or money?" A pause. Why, I told her what I knew. Not everything, not the toast, not yet, but the call from Daphne, the prospectus, my assessment of what it actually was. Another silence, longer this time. Then, "Dad, he told me about this 6 weeks ago. He said you were going to invest. He said you were excited about it." I was quiet for a moment. "I see." I asked him about the details. He couldn't explain it very well. I told him it sounded sketchy. He got defensive and said I didn't understand how investment worked. She paused. "I didn't push it because I assumed you'd reviewed it. I assumed you wouldn't put money into something that wasn't legitimate." "I haven't put any money into it." She exhaled slowly. "Okay, what are you going to do?" I told her I needed another few days to be certain about what I was dealing with. She offered to help, and I told her the most helpful thing she could do was not say anything to Gareth yet. She agreed, reluctantly. Over the following week, I tracked the investment vehicle as carefully as I could without access to tools I no longer had in retirement. What I could establish, using public records and some careful attention to the named principals, was that at least 2 of the individuals involved in structuring this company had been associated with other ventures that had collapsed under circumstances that were never fully explained. No criminal charges. These things rarely get that far, but civil suits, regulatory complaints, former investors who had lost money and had nowhere to go with it. I documented everything: dates, amounts, names, registration numbers, the discrepancies I found. I organized it the way I would have organized a client file: clean, sequenced, auditable. Then I called Gareth and asked if I could come for dinner. "Just the 2 of us," I said. I wanted to talk about the investment. He sounded pleased, relieved, almost. I arrived at the Canada House on a Thursday evening. Daphne was, conveniently, out with a friend. Gareth had made chili, the recipe I'd taught him when he was 16, using the smoked paprika that his mother had always added. He'd lit a fire in the living room. He was trying, in his way. We ate. We talked about small things. He asked about the cottage, about whether I was going to sell it. I said I hadn't decided. He nodded in that careful way that meant he had an opinion he wasn't sharing. After dinner, he poured us each a scotch and we sat by the fireside with studied casualness. So, the investment, yes, I said. The investment. I reached into my jacket and put the file folder on the coffee table between us. He looked at it, then he looked at me. I've been doing some homework, I said. I want you to read what I've put together. He picked up the folder, he opened it. I watched him read. It took about 10 minutes. His face changed in ways that were difficult to watch. The color first, then something around his eyes. A tightening that I recognized as the expression he'd had at 8 years old when he'd broken the basement window and had to tell me about it. "Dad," he said finally. His voice was smaller than I'd heard it in 30 years. I didn't know about any of this." "I believe you didn't know all of it," I said, "but I think you knew enough to be uncomfortable. And you went ahead anyway." He put the folder down. He didn't say anything. "How much have you already put in?" I asked. A very long silence. 30,000, he said, from the line of credit. I kept my face still. "When?" "2 months ago. Daphne said this was the way to fix everything. The truck, the credit cards, the loan." He looked at me, and what I saw in his face then wasn't defiance or manipulation, it was exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. "She said if this worked, we'd be able to pay everything back, including you." "Your loan from me," I said, "was not the most urgent problem here." He nodded. His hands were wrapped around the Scotch glass, and he wasn't drinking from it. I told him what I thought his options were. I told him that $30,000 on a line of credit, while serious, was not catastrophic. It was recoverable. I told him that if he and Daphne had lost that money to a fraudulent scheme, there were reporting avenues. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, the OSC, potentially the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit, depending on the structure. I told him that if he went through those channels, he was unlikely to get the money back, but he would be on record as a victim rather than a participant, which mattered enormously. I told him I would help him, but I needed him to be honest with me about everything. Not some of it. Everything. He talked for a long time. The fire burned down while he talked. He told me about the past 2 years. The consulting work that had never quite materialized. The credit card debt that had accumulated quietly while he told me things were going well. The way Daphne had found this opportunity through someone in her network and had believed in it completely, had pushed for it, had been certain it was the answer. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he was done, I said, "Did you mean what you said? At the birthday dinner?" He looked at me. "What?" "I arrived early. I was standing at the door when you made the toast." His face went through several things in rapid succession. "Dad, you don't need to explain it right now," I said. "But I need you to know that I heard it, and it affected me more than I've let on." He put his face in his hands. "Gareth." He looked up. His eyes were red. "I'm not asking for an apology tonight," I said. "I'm asking you to think, carefully and honestly, about what's been driving the choices you've made in the last 2 years. Because I don't think the investment scheme is the whole story. I think you've been trying to build something, a life that looks a certain way, and you've been hiding how much it's costing you. From me, from Petra, probably from yourself." He was quiet for a long time. The fire had gone to embers. Outside the window, the street was dark and still, and the first snow of November was starting to come down. Light, tentative, just barely visible in the light from the neighbor's front porch. "I need you to do something for me," I said. He nodded. "Talk to Daphne tonight. Tell her what's in that file. Tell her you've spoken to me. And tomorrow morning, I want you to call the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center together. I'll give you the number. I'll help you put together what you need to report." He nodded again. His jaw was tight. "And then," I said, "I think the two of you should sit down with a financial counselor. Not an investment advisor, a counselor. Someone who can help you make a budget and stick to it and stop pretending that everything is fine when it isn't." "And the loan," he said quietly. "The loan can wait," I said. "That's not what tonight is about." I drove home through the early snow. The highway back into Nepean was quiet. just the hiss of tires on wet pavement and the radio playing something I wasn't really listening to. I thought about my wife, who had been gone for 7 years now, and who had always known how to talk to Gareth in ways I couldn't quite replicate. She'd had a patience with him that came naturally to her, and that I'd spent years trying to learn and never entirely managed. I thought about what I had and hadn't done right, over 41 years of being his father. The ways I'd communicated through expectation rather than conversation, the times I'd reviewed the arithmetic of a situation and missed the human being in the middle of it. I wasn't entirely without fault in how things had gotten to this point. I knew that. But I also knew that I had sat at a table tonight with my son and told him the truth, and asked him to tell me the truth back, and that something in the room had shifted in a way I couldn't quite quantify, but could feel clearly enough. Whether Gareth and Daphne would follow through, whether they would call the fraud center, whether they would see a counselor, whether Daphne would receive the information with honesty rather than defensiveness. I didn't know. I couldn't control that. I could only control what I'd put in front of him and hope that it was enough to change the direction things were heading. He called me the next morning, earlier than I expected, just before 8. "We called," he said. "The fraud center. We did it this morning." "Good," I said. "Daphne wants to talk to you. At some point. When she's ready." A pause. "She's?" It's hard for her to admit she was wrong about it. She really believed it was legitimate. "Nice to know," I said. "There's time, Dad." He stopped, tried again. What I said. "At the birthday I don't," he went quiet. "You were performing," I said, "for the room. I understand how that works. That's not." "I know it isn't a full explanation," I said, "but it's a start, and a start is enough for now." After I hung up, I went to the kitchen and stood at the doorframe where my wife's handwriting was still there in pencil. 6 different heights, 6 different years, the names written in her neat, tilting print. Gareth, age 7. Gareth, age 9. Gareth, age 11. I stood there for a while. Then I put the kettle on and opened the blinds and let the morning in.